You know that moment, right? You're driving along, everything seems fine, and then, something just feels
Yeah,
off. Maybe it's a weird smell or the car kind of hesitates when you accelerate.
yeah,
Or just, you know, a feeling that things aren't quite right.
definitely. And it's instantly stressful, isn't it? Your mind just jumps to the worst case.
Exactly. And for
Yeah.
so many people, that worst case is the transmission. Big, scary, expensive.
Totally understandable. Transmission problems, they feel complicated, and yeah, they can hit the wallet hard. But here's the really interesting bit, looking through all this research you pulled together.
Okay.
What if I told you that a lot of those times, maybe most of the times, when you think it's the transmission, it's actually not?
Really?
Yeah, it's often the engine or something related, just like pretending to be a transmission issue. Your car's doing a bit of automotive theater, a disguise.
Okay.
Disguise, I like that. Let's dig into this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to ShopTalk, the podcast where auto repair pros get real insights to grow smarter, run smoother, and boost profits. We've got a whole stack of sources here looking at these common mix-ups, how engine problems can perfectly fake transmission trouble, and how to, spot the real culprit behind performance issues, strange noises, all those confusing signs. So, our mission for this episode, let's help cut through the confusion. Yeah, understand how these systems are connected in surprising ways, and hopefully help you feel a bit more clued in next time you're diagnosing an engine problem or your car starts acting weird.
Absolutely. Because knowing what might be going on helps you diagnose more efficiently or talk to your mechanic. Give them a clearer picture.
Which could mean getting the right fix faster.
And maybe avoiding repairs you don't actually need. Huge savings, potentially.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea, the disguise. What are some of the sneakiest ways an engine problem can fool us? I mean, one that jumped out at me from the articles was that burning smell.
Yes.
My first thought is always burning transmission fluid.
It's a classic reaction, isn't it? But the sources point out pretty consistently, actually, that a burning smell, especially if it's kind of oily or like hot rubber, is often just an engine oil leak.
K-12.
Yeah. Oil dripping onto, say, hot exhaust manifold or other engine parts, it burns off, creates that smell. Nothing to do with the transmission itself in many cases.
Wow, okay. An oil leak. Definitely prefer that to a transmission rebuild.
Much cheaper, yeah.
So what about that feeling of the car just not wanting to go? Like, you hit the gas and it's sluggish, doesn't accelerate right, maybe even struggles to keep speed. That just feels like a gear issue.
And that's probably the most convincing disguise of all, because it feels exactly like the transmission is slipping or not shifting. But again, these sources show so many engine-related reasons for that poor acceleration. One of the big ones, spark plugs.
Spark plugs. Seriously, how does that feel like a transmission failing?
Well, think about what they do, right? Ignite the fuel and air. If your plugs are old, maybe dirty, or the gap is wrong, they don't spark efficiently.
Okay.
So the engine doesn't burn the fuel properly, it makes less power. And that lack of power, it feels just like the car is stuck in the wrong gear and the transmission isn't kicking down when you need it to.
Okay. So the engine just isn't delivering the punch for the transmission to work with, even if the transmission itself is okay.
Precisely. And that leads right into engine misfires. A misfire is basically one cylinder not doing its job correctly.
Right?
This can feel like the engine is stumbling, or you might feel a shudder when it should be shifting smoothly, or just a general loss of speed. Again, symptoms you'd easily pin on the transmission.
But it could just be a bad spark plug causing that cylinder to misfire.
Or an ignition coil or something else in the combustion process, yeah. But often starts with the plugs.
What about fuel problems? You mentioned fuel delivery. If the engine's starved for gas, how does that impersonate a shifting problem?
It's another power issue, fundamentally. If the fuel pump isn't strong enough, or maybe the fuel filter is clogged, or the injectors aren't spraying right.
The engine isn't getting enough juice.
Exactly. It just can't make the power you're asking for when you press the pedal. So it feels hesitant, sluggish, like it's in too high a gear, or the transmission is slipping. Same feeling, different cause.
Okay. So basically, anything that cuts the engine's power output can trick you. What about, I saw something about a clogged catalytic converter that's part of the exhaust. How does that fit in?
Right. Seems unrelated at first glance, but think about breathing. The engine needs to breathe out just as much as it needs to breathe in.
Okay.
If the catalytic converter is clogged up, Maybe the internal honeycomb structure is breaking down. It restricts that outflow of exhaust gases.
Create back pressure.
Exactly. It's like trying to run while breathing through a straw. The engine can't expel the burnt gases efficiently, so it can't take in the fresh air and fuel charge properly. It chokes.
And that choking feels like sluggishness, like the transmission isn't downshifting.
Precisely. You demand power, the engine can't deliver because it can't breathe, and it feels just like transmission lag.
Man, these systems are so tangled up. Okay, now here's one that sounds like it must be transmission related. Yeah, based on the sources, a faulty speed sensor. It literally talks to the transmission.
Right. It does, absolutely. This one's a bit different because it directly affects the transmission's brain, essentially. The vehicle speed sensor, or VSS, tells the car's computer how fast the wheels are turning.
Which tells the automatic transmission when to shift.
Exactly. So if that sensor is broken or sending wonky signals, the transmission gets confused. It might shift way too early or too late or hold gears too long, revving really high. Or in some cases, it might prevent overdrive from engaging or even lock you out of higher gears altogether, so you're stuck driving really slow.
And you might see the speedometer acting weird too.
Yeah, erratic speedometer is a classic sign. Maybe an intermittent check engine light pops on and off. Or sometimes people notice the transmission just revs higher than usual before it finally shifts. Some sources even mention hard-braking feel when coasting.
So that feels like transmission failure, but the transmission itself might be fine. It's just getting bad instructions.
Correct. Bad data in, bad shifting out.
And I also saw something about a broken temperature sensor causing problems. Even putting the car into limp mode, that sounds dramatic.
It can be, yeah. This is another case of bad information. If the engine coolant temperature sensor fails and tells the computer the engine is like dangerously overheating, even if it's not, or maybe way too cold.
The computer panics.
Pretty much. It triggers a protective strategy, often called limp mode or fail-safe mode. This drastically cuts engine power and limits vehicle speed to prevent potential damage based on that faulty temperature reading.
So you're crawling along at 20 miles an hour thinking your transmission just died.
When really it's just a sensor feeding the computer bad info about how hot the engine is. The sources mentioned you might have noticed other signs beforehand too, like maybe poor fuel economy, the check engine light being on, or maybe even actual signs of overheating or black smoke if the sensor issue is tied to a real problem.
Wow. Okay, so sensors are huge potential culprits for mimicking transmission issues. What about more sort of mechanical feeling problems, like you try to shift out of park and the lever just won't budge?
Yeah, that's another one that sends people straight to worrying about the transmission linkage or something internal. But very often it's not the transmission itself, it's the shift interlock system.
Right?
You know, the safety thing that makes you put your foot on the brake before you can shift out of park. Oh, right. If the switch connected to the brake pedal or the cable or solenoid involved in that system malfunctions, it doesn't get the signal that the brake is pressed. So it physically won't let the shifter move.
So, a safety feature glitch, not a busted transmission. What about difficulty shifting only when the car is cold? Like it's sticky at first, but then it smooths out after driving a bit.
That's a really good clue, actually. Often points away from internal transmission wear.
Why is that?
Because, as the sources suggest, that symptom often comes down to the external parts that connect your shifter to the transmission, the cables or linkages.
When they're cold, especially if they've got some dirt or old grease or a slight corrosion on them, they can be stiff, hard to move smoothly.
But then as the engine bay warms everything up,
They loosen up, move freely, and the shifting feels normal again. The transmission's internal parts were probably fine the whole time.
fascinating.
Okay.
And lastly, the ultimate wild card that can mess up basically anything, problems with the car's computer.
Oh, absolutely. Modern cars are rolling networks. The main computer, the ECM or ECU, and often the separate transmission control module, TCM, they manage everything.
Including telling the transmission exactly when and how hard to shift.
Precisely. So if there's a software glitch, a bad connection, a sensor feeding bad data to the computer, or even the computer itself starting to fail, it can send garbage commands or no commands to a perfectly healthy transmission.
Making it seem completely broken.
Yep. It's like the brain isn't working right, so the body doesn't respond correctly. The transmission is just doing what it's told or not told to do. Okay? So we've got this whole gallery of engine-related issues posing as transmission problems. But let's shift gears slightly. What about the direct signs? The red flags, they're screaming engine trouble loud and clear whether or not they're confusing you about the transmission.
Well, the big obvious one we all know is the check engine light, the CEL.
That dreaded
it's
light.
vague, right? Isn't it? Doesn't tell you what's wrong, but as all the sources stress, it always means the engine's computer has detected something operating outside its normal limits. It needs looking at. The code's red.
Definitely. Okay, beyond lights, what about sounds? Not the normal engine sounds, but, weird noises.
Yeah, definitely listen for changes, things like grinding or maybe a pinging or knocking sound, especially under acceleration. That could be something called spark knock or detonation.
Where the fuel ignites wrong.
Yeah, at the wrong time or unevenly.
Yeah.
And that can actually damage pistons or cylinder walls over time. If it's bad, not good.
What about other noises like ticking?
A persistent ticking noise, especially one that changes with engine speed, often points towards the valvetrain, the lifters, rockers, camshafts. Could be low oil pressure or wear in those parts.
And squealing.
Squealing is often, thankfully, simpler. Usually a belt, the serpentine belt that drives the alternator, water pump, etc. It might be loose, cracked, or glazed.
Okay. And we talked about poor performance feeling like transmission trouble, but obviously poor performance is also just a sign of engine trouble itself.
Right. A general lack of power, the car feeling sluggish, even if the shifting seems okay, struggling to hold speed on hills. These are all classic signs. The engine itself isn't making the power it should. Could be ignition, fuel, airflow. Lots of possibilities we've touched on.
And exhaust smoke. You mentioned smells, but the color of the smoke coming out the tailpipe apparently tells a story.
It really does. It's like a diagnostic code in itself sometimes.
Yeah.
If you're seeing black smoke.
Too much fuel, right?
Generally, yeah. The engine's running rich, meaning the air-fuel mixture has too much gasoline. Could be bad sensors, leaky injectors, ignition timing off. Something's upsetting that balance.
Okay, what about white smoke?
White smoke, especially if it's thick, maybe smells a bit sweet and doesn't go away quickly like normal condensation might. That's usually bad news. It often means coolant is getting into the combustion chambers.
Like a blown head gasket.
That's the most common culprit, unfortunately. A serious issue that needs immediate attention.
And blue smoke.
Blue or grayish-blue smoke means the engine is burning oil.
How does that happen?
Usually because internal parts are worn. Things like piston rings that are supposed to scrape oil off the cylinder walls, or valve seals that stop oil from leaking down the valve stems. If they're worn, oil gets into the combustion chamber and burns along with the fuel.
That's incredibly useful, the color coding. Another one that might be more subtle, reduced fuel economy, finding yourself at the gas station more often.
Yeah, it can definitely be a sign. If your driving habits haven't changed, but you're noticing you're filling up, say, 10-15% more often, something's likely making the engine run less efficiently.
What kinds of things?
Sources point to things like a failing oxygen sensor that helps regulate the air-fuel mixture, or maybe dirty intake valves restricting airflow, or other fuel system issues causing inefficient combustion. Basically, the engine is working harder, using more gas to do the same job.
And then there's the big one, the one you absolutely cannot ignore, overheating.
Yes, this is a giant red flag. If that temperature gauge climbs into the red zone or you get an overheat warning light, pull over safely as soon as you can and shut off the engine.
Why is it so critical?
Because the engine is generating immense heat, and the cooling system, the radiator, water pump, thermostat, coolant fluid, is designed to manage that. If it fails, the engine temperature skyrockets.
And that causes damage.
Severe damage, very quickly. You can warp the cylinder head, blow head gaskets, even crack the engine block. We're talking potentially thousands of dollars in repairs, or even needing a whole new engine. Don't risk driving an overheating car.
Okay, message received loud and clear on overheating. So we've gone through the symptoms, the sneaky transmission mimics, and the direct engine warnings. Let's just quickly tie together the common causes behind these engine woes based on the sources.
Yeah, there are definite themes that pop up again and again. Ignition system problems are huge.
Spark plugs, coils.
Exactly. Worn plugs, bad coils, even faulty wiring. Anything that messes with getting a good spark at the right time will cause misfires, rough running, poor performance, hard starting.
And fuel delivery issues seem just as common.
Absolutely. Clogged fuel filter is a classic. Failing fuel pump, dirty injectors, problems with the fuel pressure regulator. Even like we mentioned, a loose gas cap can sometimes cause a check engine light related to the evaporative emissions system, which is part of fuel management.
Right. And airflow. We talked about the catalytic converter, but beer filter matters too.
Definitely. A really dirty air filter restricts air coming into the engine. Less air means less efficient combustion, less power. Simple fix, but important. So yeah, airflow in via the filter and airflow out via the exhaust, including the catalytic converter, both are crucial.
And sensors. They came up so much in the misdiagnosis part, but their failure is a direct cause too.
They're the engine's eyes and ears. Oxygen sensors monitoring exhaust gases, the mass airflow sensor measuring incoming air, throttle position sensor tracking your accelerator pedal, speed sensors, temperature sensors.
All feeding data to the computer.
Right. And if any of them fail or start sending inaccurate data, the computer makes bad decisions about fuel mixture, ignition timing, even transmission shifting in some cases, leads to all sorts of performance issues, poor mileage, and check engine lights.
Cooling system failures, radiator pump, thermostat. Those seem like direct causes for overheating.
They are the primary causes, yes. A leak losing coolant, a water pump not circulating it, a thermostat stuck closed preventing circulation, or a radiator clogged and unable to dissipate heat, all laid straight to overheating if not caught.
And oil. We mentioned leaks causing smells and blue smoke, meaning burning oil. But the basic presence and quality of oil is fundamental, right?
It's everything. Engine oil lubricates, cleans, and helps cool internal parts. Running low on oil starvation is catastrophic. Causes rapid wear, friction, overheating, and can seize the engine completely.
And leaks mean you might run low.
Exactly. Leaks from worn gaskets, seals, a damaged oil pan, even a badly installed filter. They not only make a mess, but risk the engine's health if the level drops too much. And burning oil, aside from the smoke, also means you're losing oil and indicates internal wear. Regular oil changes with the right oil are vital.
And sometimes the issue isn't even deep in the engine, but just getting it started.
Yeah, sometimes the engine won't run. Problem is simply a dead battery is the classic. Or the starter motor itself failing, it just clicks or does nothing. Or back to fuel, and if the fuel pump doesn't run when you turn the key, the engine won't get fuel to start. These feel like major engine failures, but the fix might be outside the engine block itself.
Okay, so bringing this all back home for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Why wade through all these potential problems? It sounds kind of daunting.
It might seem like a lot, but think of it this way. Knowledge here is genuinely power, especially when facing car trouble. Instead of just vaguely saying, something's wrong, maybe the transmission, you can be more specific.
Like noticing when it happens, cold, hot. Accelerating.
Exactly. Or describing the sound, is it a grind, a tick, a squeal? Or mentioning the smell or the color of the smoke, does it feel like a lack of power or more like erratic shifting?
And having that level of detail helps the mechanics.
Massively. As the sources point out, giving your mechanic a detailed description of the symptoms helps them narrow down the possibilities much faster. It points them in the right direction.
Less diagnostic time may be a more accurate first guess.
Which leads to a quicker, correct repair. And crucially, it reduces the chance of paying for something like a transmission diagnostic or even replacement when the real issue was, say, a $50 sensor or clogged filter.
And it really drives home the value of routine maintenance, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So many of these causes dirty filters, old spark plugs, low or dirty oil, low coolant corroded cables can be prevented or caught early with regular checks and servicing.
Oil changes, coolant flushes, filter replacements, checking belts and hoses, maybe looking under the car for leaks now and then.
That consistent care is your best defense against many of these bigger, scarier problems developing in the first place. And, pragmatically, one source did touch on the idea that if you are facing repeated, expensive engine repairs, it might be worth weighing those costs against the car's value and considering if it's time to upgrade.
A fair point, especially with older vehicles. So, okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. We've basically seen how a whole host of engine issues and problems in related systems can put on a convincing act making you think your transmission is the problem.
From simple oil leaks causing smells to faulty sensors messing with shifting.
And we've also tuned into the direct signals the engine sends, those specific noises, the meaning behind smoke colors, drops in performance or fuel economy, and the critical warning of overheating.
And we identified those common culprits behind the scenes, the ignition system, fuel delivery, airflow, all those crucial sensors, the cooling system, and the absolute necessity of proper oil maintenance.
So the big takeaway really is that understanding these connections even just basically helps you decode what your car might actually be trying to tell you.
It moves you from just feeling anxious about a weird symptom to being a more informed observer, able to provide better clues for diagnosis.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. How does knowing that something like a faulty speed sensor or a clogged catalytic converter, or even just old spark plugs, can perfectly mimic a catastrophic transmission failure? How does that change how you might react to that next check engine light or interpret that new noise your car starts making? Well, something to think about. Thanks for tuning in to Shop Talk by ShopOfficer. If you found this helpful, share it with a fellow mechanic or shop owner and follow for more real-world advice. Want to take your shop digital? Visit shopofficer.com to get started for free. Until next time, keep wrenching smarter.
1, 2,